My son slapped me across the face and spat the words, "Now I am the boss." I wiped the blood from my lip and said nothing. I just looked at him. He thought my silence was submission. He thought he had finally broken the old man. But he was wrong. The next morning I woke up before dawn and cooked a feast fit for a king. When he walked into the kitchen, he smiled, thinking he had won. He said, "Finally you understand your place." He sat down to eat, arrogant and proud, until the doorbell rang and he saw who was actually sitting at the table waiting for him. But before I tell you how I served my son the coldest breakfast of his life, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there. It brings me a lot of joy to know my story is reaching good people all over the world. My name is Lawrence Sullivan, but everyone used to call me Larry, back when I was hauling steel across state lines. I am 70 years old. I spent 40 years building a logistics empire from a single rusted truck into a fleet that covers the entire East Coast. I thought I was building a legacy. I thought I was building a future for my family. But as I sat in my favorite leather armchair in the living room I built with my own money, I realized I had built a nest for vipers. It didn't start with a conversation. It started with a heavy thud. A thick manila folder hit the mahogany coffee table so hard it knocked over my reading glasses. I looked up to see my son Bradley. He is 38 years old, dressed in a designer suit that I paid for wearing a watch that cost more than my first 3 cars combined. But his face was twisted, ugly, unrecognizable. "Sign it," he shouted. His voice cracked with a desperation I had never heard before. I looked at the document. Durable power of attorney, full financial control. It was a death warrant for my independence. It would give him access to everything. My bank accounts, my real estate, the $12 million sitting in the trust I had set up for my retirement. I looked him in the eye and said calmly, "I am not signing this, Bradley. I am perfectly healthy. I am perfectly sane. And I am not handing over my life's work just because you made some bad investments." That was when the air in the room changed. Bradley's face turned a shade of red that reminded me of a boiler about to burst. He stepped closer. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. It was 2 in the afternoon. "You are old," he hissed. "You are losing it, Dad. Everyone knows it. You are forgetting things. You are stubborn. You are not fit to manage $12 million anymore. You are going to sign this or we will do this the hard way." I tried to stand up. I wanted to look him in the eye, man to man. But before I could straighten my knees, his hand lashed out. The slap was loud. It echoed off the high ceilings of the living room. It wasn't just a slap. It was a strike. The back of his hand connected with my cheekbone with a force that sent me sprawling back into the chair and then down onto the hardwood floor. I tasted copper immediately. Blood. My blood. For a few seconds the room spun. I lay there on the cold wood, my hand instinctively going to my mouth. I felt the warm trickle running down my chin. I looked at my hand. It was trembling not from fear, but from shock. And then the irony hit me harder than the slap. I looked at my hand. This heavy, calloused hand. In 1978, these hands gripped the steering wheel of an 18-wheeler through a blizzard in Montana. The wind was howling at 60 miles an hour. The roads were black ice. One wrong move and I would have gone off a cliff. I held that truck steady for 12 hours straight to deliver a shipment that would pay for Bradley's first crib. I froze my fingers changing tires in the mud so he could have warm clothes. I fought Union tough guys in the shipyards of New Jersey in the 80s to make sure he could go to a private school. I used these hands to build a world for him. And now he used his soft, manicured hands to strike me down in my own home. I looked up. Bradley was standing over me, breathing hard, rubbing his knuckles. He looked terrified for a second, but then he looked at the corner of the room and his confidence returned. I turned my head. Tiffany, my daughter-in-law, was standing there. She wasn't rushing to help me. She wasn't screaming in horror. She was standing with her arms crossed, leaning against the doorframe, holding her smartphone up. The red light was blinking. She was recording. "Look at him," Tiffany sneered. Her voice was cold, dripping with venom. "Look at how aggressive he is. He tripped and fell because he was trying to attack you, Bradley. We have it all on video." She walked closer, the camera lens pointed directly at my bleeding lip. "If you don't sign that paper, Lawrence, we are going to show this video to the judge," she said. "We will edit it. We will show the part where you stood up screaming. We will show the part where you look confused and disoriented on the floor. We will prove you are a danger to yourself and others. We will have you committed to a psychiatric facility tonight." Do you know what happens in those places to old men who can't control their temper? They sedate them. They tie them down. And they never let them leave. I looked at her. I remembered the day I gave her a diamond necklace worth $20,000 for their wedding. I remembered welcoming her into this house as the daughter I never had. I realized then that I hadn't just raised a spoiled son. I had invited a predator into my home. My mind started to race. I calculated my odds. I was 70. Bradley was 38. If I tried to fight him, he would beat me senseless. If I tried to run, they would catch me. If I called the police now, it would be my word against theirs, and they had a video they could manipulate. I needed time. I needed them to think they had won. I slowly pushed myself up into a sitting position. I took a handkerchief from my pocket and wiped the blood from my mouth. I looked at the blood on the white cloth. It was bright red. I looked at Bradley. He was still standing over me, chest heaving, waiting for me to fight back so he could hit me again. "Bring me the pen," I whispered. My voice was raspy. Bradley's eyes lit up. He exchanged a look with Tiffany, a look of pure, triumphant greed. He snatched the pen from the table and shoved the document in front of me on the floor. "Right here," he said, pointing to the signature line. "Sign it, and you can go to your room and rest. We will take care of everything, Dad. We will take care of the money." I took the pen. I let my hand shake violently. I let the tip of the pen dance over the paper without touching it. I made my breathing sound shallow and panicked. "I cannot do it," I wheezed. "Look at my hand." "Bradley, I am shaking too much. I can't hold the pen steady. The shock. My heart is racing." "Just sign the damn paper," he yelled. "I can't," I said, dropping the pen. It rolled across the floor. "If I sign it like this, the bank will know it was under duress. The signature won't match. It will be void. Let me rest. Just let me sleep. My hand will be steady in the morning. I promise. I will sign it first thing at breakfast." Bradley looked at Tiffany. She narrowed her eyes, calculating. "Let him sleep," she said. "He is right. If the signature looks like a scribble, the lawyers will contest it. Let him rot in his room tonight. He isn't going anywhere. We have his phone. We cut the landline. He is trapped." Bradley nodded. He grabbed me by the arm roughly and hauled me to my feet. He dragged me down the hallway to the master bedroom. My bedroom. The room I shared with my late wife for 30 years. He shoved me inside. "Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., Bradley said. "You sign the papers, or I swear to God, the next place you sleep will have padded walls." He slammed the door. I heard the distinct click of the key turning in the lock from the outside. Then I heard his footsteps walking away, laughing. I stood there in the dark, listening to the silence of the house I built. My lip was throbbing. My heart was pounding. But my mind was clearer than it had been in a decade. They thought they had locked a helpless old man in his room. They forgot who I was. They forgot that before I was a CEO, before I was a suburban grandfather growing roses in the garden, I was a man who negotiated with the toughest unions in the country. I was a man who survived bankruptcy twice. I was a fighter. I walked over to the mirror and looked at my reflection. The bruise was already forming on my jaw. "Okay, Bradley," I whispered to the empty room. "You want to be the boss? You want to play the game?" I wiped the last bit of blood from my chin. "Tomorrow morning we will see who the real boss is." I didn't go to bed. I had work to do. And the night was just beginning. The sound of the key turning in the lock echoed in my mind long after Bradley's footsteps faded down the hallway. I stood in the center of the master bedroom, the room where I had held my wife's hand as she took her last breath and listened to the house settle. They had cut the landline. I could see the severed cord dangling from the nightstand. They had taken my cell phone. They had locked the windows. In their minds, they had trapped a confused, fragile old man who would spend the night trembling in fear until he surrendered his dignity at sunrise. They were idiots. I walked to the door and pressed my ear against the wood. I heard nothing but the distant hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the wind rattling the gutters. Good. They were probably downstairs, celebrating drinking my expensive scotch, counting money they did not yet have. They thought the game was over, but they had forgotten who they were playing against. They saw a 70-year-old man who spent his days pruning roses and reading newspapers. They forgot that Lawrence Sullivan didn't start out as a grandfather. They forgot about the years I spent in the 1980s negotiating with corrupt union bosses in the shipyards of New Jersey. They forgot about the nights I slept with a tire iron under my pillow in truck stops where the law didn't reach. I wasn't just a businessman. I was a survivor, and survivors always have a contingency plan. I waited until the grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight. Then I moved. I ignored the throbbing pain in my jaw and knelt beside the heavy oak bed frame. It was solid wood, weighing hundreds of pounds, but adrenaline is a powerful fuel. I gripped the corner post and heaved. My back screamed in protest, my joints popped, but inch by inch I dragged the bed away from the wall. Underneath lay an antique Persian rug, one of the few things Patrice had insisted on keeping when we moved in. I rolled it back, revealing the hardwood floor. To the naked eye it looked seamless, but I knew better. I counted the planks from the wall. 1, 2, 3, 4. I pulled a small penknife from my pocket, a little thing I always kept on me for cutting twine in the garden. Bradley hadn't bothered to search me. That was his first mistake. I wedged the blade into the microscopic gap between the 4th and 5th planks and applied pressure. With a soft groan of wood against wood, the section of flooring popped up. Beneath it wasn't dust or subflooring. It was cold, gray steel. A floor safe. I had installed it myself in 1985, back when cash was the only language some of my business partners understood. I hadn't opened it in 15 years. My hands were shaking not from fear, but from a cold, focused rage. I hoped my memory was better than my son gave me credit for. I spun the dial. Right to 19. Left to 78. Right to 5. The tumblers clicked into place with a sound that was sweeter than any music. I pulled the heavy handle and the door swung open. The smell of old paper and gun oil wafted up to greet me. I reached inside. My hand brushed against stacks of emergency cash, legal documents, and backup deeds. I ignored them. I was looking for 2 specific things. My fingers closed around the first object. Heavy, cold, deadly. I pulled out my Colt 1911 pistol. It was wrapped in an oilcloth to prevent rust. I unwrapped it and checked the chamber. It was clean. It was loaded. I didn't want to use it. I prayed I wouldn't have to use it. But looking at the weapon, I felt a shift inside me. The helpless victim who had been slapped to the floor was gone. The soldier had returned. I placed the gun on the nightstand and reached back into the safe for the second object. It was a bulky black device with a thick antenna, a satellite phone. I had bought it years ago for emergency shipments through areas where cell towers didn't exist. I hadn't turned it on in a decade. "Please," I whispered to the empty room. "Just have enough charge for one call." I pressed the power button. The screen flickered. It stayed dark for a terrifying second, and then a faint green light illuminated the display. 1 bar of battery. That was all I needed. I didn't call the police. The police were reactionary. They would come take statements, file reports. It would be my word against Bradley and Tiffany's. They would show the video. They would say I was senile. The police couldn't help me tonight. I needed a shark. I dialed a number I had memorized 30 years ago. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Yeah," a gruff voice answered. It was Jerome Katz. "Jerry. My personal attorney, my old business partner, and the only man in the world I trusted with my life." "Jerry," I said. My voice was steady, void of the tremor I had feigned for Bradley. "It is Larry." There was a pause on the other end, then the rustling of sheets. "Larry, it's 2 in the morning. Are you okay?" "No," I said. "I am locked in my bedroom. Bradley hit me. They are trying to force me to sign a durable power of attorney. They have a video they doctored to make me look insane. They plan to put me in a home tomorrow afternoon." The silence on the other end was absolute. I knew Jerry. I knew he was sitting up in bed, his mind already calculating angles, analyzing statutes, preparing for war. "Did you sign it?" Jerry asked. His voice was sharp now, all business. "No," I said. "I stalled them. I told them I would sign at breakfast." "Good," Jerry said. "Smart. Do you want me to send the cops?" "Not yet," I said. I looked at the gun on the nightstand. "I want to end this, Jerry. Permanently. I don't just want to escape. I want to expose them. I want to bury them." I took a deep breath. "Jerry, initiate the Phoenix Protocol." There was a long pause. We hadn't used that phrase in 20 years. It was a failsafe we designed when we were fighting hostile takeovers. It meant total scorched earth. It meant liquidating assets, freezing accounts, and unleashing every legal hound in our arsenal. "Are you sure?" Jerry asked softly. "Once we pull that trigger, there is no going back. He is your son." I touched my swollen lip. I remembered the look in Bradley's eyes when he struck me. I remembered Tiffany's smirk. "I don't have a son anymore," I said. "I have a defendant." "Understood," Jerry said. "I will wake the judge. I will get the emergency injunctions. I will have the forensic accountants ready by dawn. Bring the sheriff, Jerry," I added, "and bring the file on the trust fund, the real one." "I will be there at 7 sharp," Jerry promised. "Sit tight, old friend. Tomorrow we hunt." I ended the call and powered down the phone to save the last sliver of battery. I sat on the floor next to the open safe, the Colt 1911 in my lap. I didn't sleep. I watched the moonlight crawl across the floorboards. I thought about the breakfast I was going to cook in a few hours. They wanted a show. They wanted a submissive old man serving them their victory. I would give them a meal they would never forget. The night dragged on, but I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had burned away, leaving only cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just fighting for my money. I was fighting for my life. I was fighting for the man I used to be. And as the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the curtains, I stood up. My joints ached, but I felt stronger than I had in years. It was time to cook. It was time to serve justice. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 2 times. The sound was low and mournful, vibrating through the floorboards of the silent house. 2 in the morning. The witching hour. If Bradley and Tiffany were celebrating their victory, they had passed out by now. The house was still. It was time to move. I stood by the bedroom door examining the lock. Bradley had turned the key from the outside, a simple deadbolt mechanism installed on a solid oak door. He thought it was a prison cell. To a layman, it was. To a man who had spent 30 years fixing diesel engines and hydraulic lifts, all with nothing but a wrench and a prayer, it was a minor inconvenience. I didn't have the key, but I didn't need it. I took the small penknife I had used to pry up the floorboards earlier. It wasn't a lockpick, but the gap between the door and the frame was wide enough if you knew where to apply pressure. The wood had warped slightly over the years, a defect I had meant to fix, but never got around to. Now that defect was my salvation. I slid the thin blade into the crack, feeling for the tongue of the bolt. It was stiff. I applied a steady upward torque, mimicking the rotation of a key. My hand didn't shake. I breathed out, slow and steady, visualizing the tumblers inside. Click. The sound was no louder than a cricket chirping, but in the silence it sounded like a gunshot. I froze, waiting for footsteps, waiting for a shout. Nothing. The house breathed on. I turned the handle. It gave way. I opened the door just enough to slip through. The hallway was bathed in shadows. I moved in my socks, keeping my weight on the balls of my feet to avoid the creaky boards I had memorized over 20 years of living here. I wasn't Lawrence Sullivan, the father, anymore. I was a ghost haunting his own life. I crept past the guest room where Tiffany slept. I could hear the faint sound of her snoring. I moved past the master suite where Bradley was likely passed out, dreaming of the sports cars he would buy with my money. I felt a surge of disgust so potent it almost made me sick, but I pushed it down. Emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford. I needed intelligence. I needed ammunition. I slipped into the study at the end of the hall. This used to be my office. It was where I planned the expansion into the tri-state area. It was where I signed the contracts that secured our future. Now Bradley called it his command center. It smelled of stale vape smoke and arrogance. I sat in the ergonomic chair he had bought with my credit card. The computer screen was dark. I tapped the spacebar and the monitor flared to life, casting a harsh blue glow over my face. Password required. I almost laughed. Bradley was a man who thought he was a genius, but he was lazy. He lacked imagination. I tried the obvious first. 031285. His birthday. March 12, 1985. The screen unlocked immediately. I didn't feel triumph. I felt pity. He was 38 years old, and he still used his birthday as a password for a machine that contained his entire life. It was pathetic. I opened his email client. I didn't have to dig deep to find the rot. It was right there at the top of the inbox, marked with high-priority red flags. The sender's name was Vinny, just Vinny, but the subject lines told a story that made my blood run cold. Final warning. Payment overdue. We know where you live. I opened the most recent one, sent just 6 hours ago. It was brief and brutal. Bradley, you are out of time. The crypto market crashed, but my patience didn't. You owe us $850,000. If we don't have the first installment by Friday, we aren't coming for the money. We are coming for your knees, and then we are coming for your wife. Vinny the Shark. I knew the type. These weren't bankers. These were the kind of men who solved problems with baseball bats in parking lots. So that was it. It wasn't just greed. It was terror. Bradley had gambled away nearly $1 million on digital coins that didn't exist, and now the sharks were circling. He needed my $12 million not to live like a king, but to stay alive. I scrolled down. I needed more. I needed to know how deep the betrayal went. I typed my own name into the search bar. Lawrence Sullivan. Hundreds of emails appeared, mostly forwarded legal documents and bank statements. But one email stood out. It was dated yesterday. The sender was an administrator at a place called Shady Pines. I clicked it. It was a contract. An admission agreement. Dear Mr. Sullivan, we have received the preliminary paperwork for the transfer of your father, Lawrence Sullivan, to our facility in rural Alabama. Per your instructions, we have prepared a bed in the secure ward. I scanned the document, my eyes skipping over the legal jargon until I hit the section on care levels. Patient status, hospice care. Directives, do not resuscitate. Comfort measures only. No advanced life support. No transfer to acute care hospitals in event of emergency. My hands went cold. Shady Pines wasn't a retirement community. It was a warehouse for the dying. It was a place where you sent people you wanted to forget. They weren't planning to care for me. They were planning to sedate me, stick me in a bed in the middle of nowhere, and wait for nature to take its course. They were expediting my death. Hospice care, I whispered to the empty room. I was healthy. I walked 3 miles a day. I had perfect blood pressure. And they had signed a paper saying I was dying. The email continued. Transport is scheduled for tomorrow Wednesday at 4:00 p.m. Please ensure the patient is sedated prior to our team's arrival to ensure a smooth transition. Tomorrow afternoon. That was their deadline. That was why they needed the signature at breakfast. They needed legal control before the van arrived to haul me away like a sack of expired meat. I felt a tear run down my cheek. It wasn't sadness. It was the last drop of love I had for my son leaving my body. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small USB drive I had brought from the safe. I plugged it in. I downloaded everything. The threats from Vinny. The crypto trading logs showing the massive losses. The contract with Shady Pines. The emails between Bradley and Tiffany discussing how to sell my house before the body was even cold. I took it all. I ejected the drive and put it in my pocket. It felt heavy like a stone. I was about to shut down the computer when I heard a sound. It was faint, but unmistakable. The creak of a floorboard in the hallway. I froze. My hand hovered over the mouse. Someone was awake. I quietly turned off the monitor, plunging the room back into darkness. I slid out of the chair and crouched behind the heavy mahogany desk. I held my breath, listening. The footsteps were soft, slippered feet. They were coming closer. They stopped right outside the office door. I saw the shadow of feet under the door gap. The doorknob began to turn. I gripped the penknife in my pocket, not as a weapon, but as a reminder of who I was. I wasn't a victim. I was a soldier behind enemy lines. If they came in, if they saw me, the game would change. I would have to improvise. But I prayed they would keep walking. The knob turned fully. The door cracked open an inch. A sliver of hallway light cut across the carpet, missing me by inches. "Hello," a voice whispered. It was Tiffany. Her voice wasn't slurred with sleep. It was alert. Suspicious. I didn't move a muscle. I didn't breathe. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, but I willed my body to be stone. She stood there for 10 seconds, 10 eternities. Then she sighed. "Must be the wind," she muttered to herself. She pulled the door shut. I heard her footsteps retreat, not back to her room, but towards the balcony door at the end of the hall. She wasn't going back to sleep. She was going to make a call. I waited until I heard the sliding glass door of the balcony open and close. I stood up in the dark office. I had the evidence. I knew their plan. But now I had a new target. Tiffany wasn't just an accomplice. She was awake at 2:30 a.m. making secret calls on the balcony while her husband slept. I needed to know who was on the other end of that line. I ejected the USB drive, feeling the cold metal warm up in my palm. I had enough to prove he was a thief and a fraud. But my instincts, the same instincts that kept me alive when I was hauling freight through the worst neighborhoods in Detroit, were screaming at me. There was something missing. The debt to Vinny the shark was $850,000. My liquid assets in the accounts Bradley could access immediately were substantial, but they wouldn't clear that debt overnight without raising red flags with the bank. He needed a lump sum. He needed a payout that couldn't be traced or frozen. I looked around the study. My eyes landed on the wall behind the desk. There hung a large, pretentious oil painting of a racehorse that Bradley had bought at an auction last year. He didn't know anything about horses. He just liked things that looked expensive. But I noticed something odd. The frame was tilted ever so slightly to the left. Bradley was obsessive about appearances. He would never leave a picture crooked, unless he had moved it recently. I stood up and walked around the desk. I gripped the heavy gold frame and swung it outward on its hinges. There it was, a wall safe. Not the old mechanical one I had under the floorboards, but a modern digital keypad safe. The kind you buy when you have secrets you are terrified of keeping. I looked at the keypad. Bradley was lazy, but he wasn't stupid enough to use his birthday. Twice, was he? I tried. 32285. Red light. Error. I paused. I thought about my son. I thought about what mattered to him. What was the only thing Bradley loved more than himself? I typed in the date of his wedding to Tiffany. 061519. June 15th, 2019. The light turned green. The lock clicked. I felt a wave of nausea. He was so predictable, so hollow. I pulled the door open. Inside there were no stacks of cash. There were no diamonds. There was only a thick blue envelope resting on the velvet lining. I took it out. The logo on the corner belonged to a major insurance firm, Viator Life and Casualty. I opened it. My hands, which had been steady holding the gun earlier, began to tremble. It wasn't just a policy. It was a key person life insurance policy, supposedly taken out by Sullivan Logistics on its founder. But as I read the fine print, the blood in my veins turned to ice. The policy value was $5 million. The beneficiary had been changed 3 months ago, exactly 2 weeks after Patrice died. It wasn't the company anymore. The primary beneficiary was Bradley Sullivan. The secondary was Tiffany Sullivan. And there, highlighted in yellow marker on page 4, was the accelerated death benefit clause. It stated that if the insured was diagnosed with a terminal illness or entered palliative hospice care with a life expectancy of less than 6 months, the full amount would be paid out immediately. I dropped the paper on the desk. The room seemed to tilt. They weren't just sending me to Shady Pines to get me out of the way. They were sending me there to trigger a $5 million payday. The admission to hospice, the false diagnosis of advanced dementia and failure to thrive, was the key to unlocking the vault. They were betting on my death. In fact, looking at Vinny's threats, they were banking on it happening fast. I stood there paralyzed by the enormity of the evil. My own son had put a price tag on my breath. $5 million. That was what my life was worth to him. Suddenly, a sound cut through the silence. Creak. It wasn't the wind. It was the distinct groan of the third step on the main staircase. Someone was coming down. I froze. The blue envelope was sitting on the desk, incriminating and bright under the moonlight. The computer screen was dark, but the mouse was still slightly askew from where I had used it. I grabbed the envelope and shoved it into the waistband of my pajama pants, covering it with my robe. I didn't have time to close the wall safe. I didn't have time to swing the painting back. The footsteps were heavier than Tiffany's. It was the lumbering, uneven tread of someone who was either drunk or exhausted. Bradley. He was coming to the study. There was nowhere to hide. The curtains were too far. The closet was on the other side of the room. I did the only thing I could. I dropped to my knees and scrambled into the knee-hole of the massive mahogany desk. I pulled the leather chair in as close as I dared, creating a barricade between me and the room. I curled into a ball, pressing my back against the wood, praying my old joints wouldn't pop. I held my breath. The door handle turned. The door swung open. Light from the hallway spilled into the room, cutting a jagged line across the carpet. I saw his feet. He was wearing expensive sheepskin slippers. He walked into the room, his steps heavy and dragging. I heard the clink of glass against glass. He was at the wet bar in the corner. He was pouring a drink at 3 a.m. Come on, Bradley muttered. His voice was slurred, thick with stress. I heard the sound of him pacing, back and forth, back and forth. He stopped right in front of the desk. I could see the toes of his slippers inches from my hiding spot. If he sat down, if he pulled the chair out even a foot, he would see me. I would be a rat in a trap. He didn't sit. He slammed a glass down on the desktop above my head. The sound exploded like a gunshot in my ears. Then his phone rang. It wasn't a ringtone. It was a vibration buzzing angrily against the wood of the desk. "Yeah," Bradley answered. His voice changed instantly. It lost the arrogance. It became small, terrified. "Vinny, it's 3 a.m. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was listening to the other side of the emails I had just read. I know, Bradley whispered, his voice rising in panic. "Listen to me, it's done. The papers, he's going to sign them in the morning. The old man is broken, I swear." He paused, listening to the threats on the other end. I could hear the faint, angry distortion of a voice shouting through the receiver. "No, don't come to the house," Bradley pleaded. "Tiffany is here, my dad is here, it will be messy. Just give me 24 hours. Once he signs the power of attorney, I can access the liquid cash. And, listen, Vinny, the insurance. It triggers as soon as the ambulance takes him. That's $5 million. You get your cut. You get double." I closed my eyes. Hearing it read in an email was one thing. Hearing my son bargain for my life with a loan shark standing inches away from me was a pain I cannot describe. It was a physical blow. "Yeah," Bradley said, his voice trembling. "He won't last long in that place. They know how to handle difficult patients. He's old. His heart is weak. It happens." My heart is weak, I thought. My heart hauled steel across the Rockies. My heart survived the death of the only woman I ever loved. My heart is stronger than you will ever know, boy. "Okay," Bradley said. "Tomorrow night. I'll have the first installment. Just don't hurt me." He hung up. I heard him take a long, gulping swallow of his drink. He slammed the glass down again. Then he moved. He leaned over the desk. I saw his hand come down, bracing himself against the edge. He was staring at the wall. "What the?" he muttered. My heart stopped. He was looking at the painting. He was looking at the open safe. He must have seen it. The painting was swung out. The safe door was ajar. I prepared myself to fight. I gripped the penknife in my pocket. If he looked down, if he saw me, I would have to take him down. I wasn't going to let him lock me up. "Damn it, Tiffany," Bradley grumbled. "Can't close a damn thing." He walked over to the wall. He slammed the safe door shut. He swung the painting back into place, straightening it obsessively. He thought Tiffany had been in the safe. He thought his wife was checking on the money, just like she checked on everything else. It didn't occur to him for a second that his father, the senile, helpless old man, could crack a digital code. "Vultures," he spat. "Everyone wants a piece of me." He grabbed his glass and walked out of the room, switching off the hallway light as he went plunging the study back into darkness. I stayed under the desk for a full 5 minutes, listening to the silence return. My legs were cramping. My back was screaming. But I was alive. And now I had the insurance policy. I crawled out from under the desk. I stood up, stretching my aching limbs. I touched the envelope in my waistband. This was the final piece. The emails proved fraud. The recording proved intent. But this proved malice. This proved they weren't just thieves. They were executioners. I was about to leave the room when I heard the sound that would lead into the next chapter of this nightmare. The distinct swish of the sliding glass door in the hallway. Tiffany. I moved to the window, my heart hardening into stone. I had survived the sun. Now it was time to face the daughter-in-law. I crept to the window and looked out towards the balcony. The game wasn't over. It was just getting interesting. The night air coming through the open balcony door was cool, but I was sweating. I stood in the darkness of my study, pressed tight against the heavy velvet curtains I had installed 10 years ago to block out the morning sun. Now those curtains were the only thing separating me from the truth. My hand was in the pocket of my robe, gripping a small, cold metal device. It was a digital voice recorder, a relic from my days investigating cargo theft in the 90s. I hadn't used it in years, but I had kept the batteries fresh. Old habits die hard. Through the sliver of space between the drapes, I could see her. Tiffany was leaning against the railing of the balcony, a silhouette framed by the moonlight. She wasn't wearing the modest nightgown she usually wore when she played the part of the dutiful daughter-in-law. She was wearing a silk robe that slipped off one shoulder, and she was smoking a cigarette. I didn't even know she smoked. Bradley hated smoking. I pressed the record button. The tiny red light blinked once, then went dark, as the device began to capture every sound. Her voice drifted into the room. It wasn't the shrill, demanding tone she had used when she was recording me on the floor earlier that afternoon. It wasn't the supportive, worried voice she used when she manipulated my son. It was low. It was husky. It was dripping with a seduction that made my stomach turn. "Relax, baby," she cooed into the phone. "It is almost over. The old man is broken. I saw his eyes tonight. He is terrified. He is going to sign the papers at breakfast. I can feel it." I gritted my teeth. Broken. She thought I was broken. She had no idea she was standing 10 feet away from a man who was currently building the cage that would trap her. She took a long drag of the cigarette and blew the smoke into the night air. "Bradley," she scoffed, answering a question from the person on the other end. "Oh, please. He is a mess. He is a nervous wreck. He thinks this money is going to save him from Vinny. He thinks we are going to pay off his crypto debt and live happily ever after in this big, ugly house. He is so stupid, Marco. He actually believes the pregnancy is the reason I am so stressed. He thinks he is protecting his unborn child." I froze. The name Marco hung in the air. Marco wasn't Bradley. "Of course it is not his," she laughed, a cruel tinkling sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Bradley hasn't touched me in months. He is too busy staring at Bitcoin charts and drinking scotch to perform. The baby is yours, Marco. And soon we will be too." I felt the blood drain from my face. My hand tightened around the recorder until my knuckles turned white. It wasn't just financial theft. It wasn't just elder abuse. It was a fundamental biological betrayal. My son was fighting his own father, destroying his own family to protect a child that wasn't even his. He was destroying me to build a future with a woman who despised him. "Listen to me," Tiffany continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The second the funds transfer to the joint account, I am wiring $5 million to the offshore account in Zurich. I already have the routing numbers. Then I am booking a flight to Milan. By the time Bradley realizes the account is empty, we will be drinking wine on the Amalfi Coast." She paused, listening to her lover. "Let Vinny break his legs," she said coldly. "I don't care. Bradley is dead weight, Marco. He is drowning, and I am not going to let him pull me down with him. He can rot in prison, or he can rot in the river. As long as we have the money, he doesn't exist." I closed my eyes. A wave of nausea washed over me. I thought back to their wedding day 3 years ago. I remembered the reception at the country club. I remembered standing in front of Tiffany holding a black velvet box. Inside was a diamond necklace worth $20,000. It had belonged to my mother. I had saved it for decades. I remembered fastening it around her neck, tears in my eyes telling her that she was the daughter I never had. I told her to take care of my boy. She had hugged me and whispered that she would love him forever. I hadn't just invited a snake into my home. I had adorned it with diamonds. I had fed it. I had nurtured it. And my son, my arrogant, foolish son who slapped me across the face to prove he was a man, he wasn't a shark. He wasn't a boss. He was a donkey. He was a beast of burden carrying a load for a woman who was planning to butcher him. For a moment, I felt a strange emotion. It wasn't anger. It was pity. Bradley was a bad son, but he was being played for a fool on a level that was almost Shakespearean in its tragedy. "I have to go," Tiffany whispered. "I don't want to wake the invalid. I will call you when the wire transfer clears tomorrow. I love you." She lowered the phone. She crushed the cigarette out on the railing of my balcony, leaving a black mark on the white painted wood. She stretched her arms over her head, arching her back, looking like a cat that had just eaten the canary. Then she turned. She didn't turn back toward the guest room where she was sleeping. She turned toward the study, toward the open glass door, toward me. I stopped breathing. She took a step toward the glass door. She was coming in. I was trapped between the heavy mahogany desk and the thick velvet curtain. If she saw me, the element of surprise was gone. If she saw me, she would scream. She would claim I was spying on her. She would twist the narrative. She would say I was a pervert, a voyeur. It would be the final nail in the coffin of my sanity defense. I couldn't let her see me. I slid backward, moving with the silence of a man who used to hunt deer in the Appalachians before his knees gave out. I pressed myself into the corner, into the deepest shadow of the bookshelf, praying that the darkness was thick enough to hide me. She slid the door open wider. The curtains billowed around me, brushing against my face like ghost fingers. She stepped into the room. She was 3 feet away from me. I could smell her perfume. It was expensive. It was heavy. It smelled like betrayal. She paused in the center of the room. She stood perfectly still. I held my breath until my lungs burned. My heart wasn't beating. It was thrashing against my ribs like a trapped bird. Thump, thump, thump. It was so loud in my own ears that I was sure she could hear it over the hum of the central air conditioning. She tilted her head to the side. She looked straight at the corner where I was hiding. Her eyes narrowed. "Did I leave the light on?" she muttered to herself. She reached out toward the wall switch. My hand gripped the penknife in my pocket. If the light came on, I would be exposed. I would have to act. And I didn't want to act yet. Not like this. Her finger touched the switch plate. I tensed my muscles, ready to spring. Then she sighed. She dropped her hand. Whatever she whispered. She turned away. She walked out of the study and down the hall toward the guest room. I listened to her footsteps fade away. I listened to her door close. I let out a breath that felt like it had been held for a lifetime. My shirt was soaked with cold sweat. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from the rush of the hunt. I looked at the recorder in my hand. I had her. I had the confession. I had the motive. I had the proof that she was conspiring to steal millions and abandon her husband. But I wasn't done. The night wasn't over. I had the evidence, but I still had a breakfast to prepare. And now I knew exactly what to serve. I slipped the recorder into my pocket and moved toward the kitchen. The sun would be up in 3 hours. It was time to start cooking. It was time to prepare the last meal of their lives as free people. But before I turned on the stove, I needed to check one more place. A dark premonition, the same gut instinct that had made me pull my rig over to check the tires on a snowy mountain pass 40 years ago, surged within me. I didn't head straight for the kitchen. Instead, I veered toward the heavy door that led down to the garage. The door groaned open, and the smell of motor oil and dust assaulted my nose. This used to be my sanctuary. It was where I had restored my 1967 Ford Mustang, the first car I ever bought, with the net profits from my company. It wasn't just a car. It was a memory. It was a monument to every drop of sweat I had spilled. I flipped the light switch. The overhead fluorescence flickered, buzzed, and then flooded the room with harsh light, exposing a naked truth that made my stomach churn. The Mustang was gone. In its place sat Tiffany's brand-new luxury SUV parked arrogantly in the bay, where I had spent hundreds of hours polishing chrome. I looked around, searching for any trace of my classic car. And then I saw it. Or at least I saw what was left of it. In the corner of the garage, covered by a cheap plastic tarp, lay the 4 original tires and the custom walnut steering wheel I had specially ordered. Taped to the wall with a strip of blue painter's tape was a scrawled, handwritten receipt. Sold vehicle chassis to Mike's scrapyard. Scrap value $800. Cash received. The date on the receipt was yesterday. They hadn't sold the car as a classic. They had sold it as scrap metal. Bradley, the boy who used to sit on my lap and pretend to steer that very car, had crushed his father's memories for pennies just to get fast cash for the Sharks. But that wasn't even the worst part. Next to the pile of tires were 3 large cardboard boxes labeled in black marker: trash, charity, burn. I opened the first box. Inside were Patrice's clothes, the dresses she wore to church on Sundays, the wool scarf she had been knitting before she passed. The scent of her perfume still lingered on the fabric, faint but heartbreakingly familiar. They had no intention of donating or keeping any of it. They were clearing out our remnants. They were scrubbing the existence of Patrice and me from this house to prepare for a new life, one that was clean, modern, and free of useless old people. I reached into the box, touching my wife's jade green cardigan. Beneath the wool, my hand brushed against something hard and cold. I pulled it out. It was a set of medical restraints, heavy-duty nylon straps used to secure agitated psychiatric patients to a gurney. I looked at the restraints, then at the receipt for the car. A deathly calm washed over me. If I had held on to a shred of hesitation before a tiny flicker of fatherly pity, it vanished right there in the cold garage. They didn't just want my money. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to turn me into expired inventory that needed to be disposed of quickly. I tossed the restraints back into the box. I didn't cry. Tears are for people who still have hope. I had no hope left for Bradley. I only had a verdict. I killed the garage lights, letting the darkness swallow Tiffany's flashy SUV and the evidence of their vile betrayal. I walked back up to the hallway, my footsteps echoing steady and sure like the fall of a judge's gavel. I walked straight to the kitchen. Now I was ready. 5:30 in the morning. The kitchen was cold, the kind of stillness that settles before a storm. I stood in the center of the room, the stainless steel appliances gleaming in the dark like silent sentinels. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. The glow from the gas range was enough. I struck a match, the sulfur flare brief and sharp, and lit the burners. Blue flames licked the bottom of the heavy cast iron skillets. It was time to cook. I opened the refrigerator. It was stocked with the finest ingredients, food bought with the money my son claimed I was too senile to manage. Thick-cut hickory smoked bacon. Artesian sausages seasoned with fennel and sage. Organic eggs with shells the color of brown sugar. I took it all out. I wasn't cooking breakfast because I was afraid. I wasn't cooking because I had accepted my new role as the household servant. I was cooking because a condemned man deserves a last meal. I laid the bacon into the cold pan, listening to the first sizzle as the fat began to render. The smell filled the air almost instantly, salty and rich. It was the smell of Sunday mornings from 30 years ago, back when Bradley was a boy, with scraped knees and a missing front tooth sitting at this very counter, waiting for his daddy to flip the pancakes. I remembered the way he used to look at me then, like I was a giant, like I could hold up the sky. I cracked the eggs into a ceramic bowl, whisking them with a rhythmic, violent intensity. The yellow yolks broke and swirled into the white. I thought about the crypto debt. I thought about Vinny the shark. I thought about the hospice in Alabama, where they planned to let me rot. Every beat of the whisk was a memory being severed. Every pop of the bacon grease was a bridge being burned. I moved to the pantry and pulled out the pancake mix. I made the batter thick, adding a dash of vanilla extract just the way Patrice used to do it. It was a recipe for love, but today I was stirring in a different ingredient: betrayal. While the sausages browned and the pancakes bubbled on the griddle, I walked over to the dining room hutch. This was the Holy of Holies. It held the family silver. The sterling silver set my mother had bought piece by piece in the 1950s. It was heavy, ornate, and worth a small fortune. I knew Tiffany coveted this silver. Every Thanksgiving I caught her eyeing it, calculating its weight, wondering how much it would fetch at a pawn shop or an estate sale. She treated it like loot waiting to be plundered. I took the box down. I laid out the forks, the knives, the spoons. I polished them with a cloth until they shone like mirrors in the dim light. I set 3 places: one for me, one for Bradley, one for Tiffany. I walked to the head of the table. My seat. The seat Bradley had claimed last night after he hit me. I placed the finest china plate on the placemat. Then I reached into my robe pocket. I pulled out the document. The durable power of attorney. The paper that was supposed to be my surrender. It was slightly crumpled from where it had fallen on the floor yesterday. There was a small, dried smear of my blood on the bottom corner. I smoothed it out. I placed it squarely in the center of Bradley's plate. It was the main course. It was the bait. I went back to the stove. The food was ready. I piled the platters high. Mountains of golden pancakes. Pyramids of crisp bacon. It looked like a feast from a magazine. It looked like love. It was the perfect camouflage. I heard the sound of footsteps on the stairs. They were light, quick steps, not the heavy, hungover tread of my son. It was Tiffany. She came into the kitchen wearing a silk robe, her hair tousled in a way that was meant to look effortless. She stopped in the doorway when she saw me. She saw the apron. She saw the steaming platters of food. She saw the table set with the silver she wanted so badly. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a queen looking at a peasant. "Well, look at this," she drawled, walking into the room. She didn't see the soldier. She saw the broken old man she thought she had created. I didn't say a word. I just kept flipping the last pancake. Finally, she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "You finally learned your place, didn't you, Lawrence? I told Bradley he just needed to be firm with you. The maid quit last week, so this works out perfectly. From now on, you will have breakfast on the table by 6 every morning. And don't burn the toast." She walked over to the island, where I had placed the carving board. A large roasted ham was resting there, glistening with honey glaze. It was something I had started slow cooking in the middle of the night while I was waiting for the sun. She reached out a hand. Her manicured fingers, the ones that had held the cigarette on the balcony while she plotted to destroy my son, hovered over the meat. She was going to tear off a piece. She was going to take what she wanted, just like she always did. I didn't look at her. My hand moved to the knife block. I pulled out the 8-inch chef's knife. The steel hissed against the wood block. Thwack! I brought the knife down. It slammed into the cutting board, the blade vibrating, missing her outstretched fingers by less than an inch. It severed a piece of the ham with surgical precision, burying itself deep into the wood. Tiffany gasped and snatched her hand back, clutching it to her chest. She stumbled backward, her eyes wide. "Do not touch it," I said. My voice was low. It wasn't the voice of the grandfather. It was the voice of the man who had stared down union breakers in the rain. I turned my head slowly and looked her in the eye. I didn't blink. I didn't smile. I let the mask slip just for a fraction of a second. I let her see the cold, hard iron underneath the skin. "We wait for the master of the house," I said. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the shallow, terrified breathing of my daughter-in-law. She looked at the knife quivering in the board. She looked at my face. For the first time since she married my son, she didn't look bored. She didn't look superior. She looked unsettled. She saw something in my eyes that didn't fit her narrative. She saw intelligence. She saw danger. But then the sound of heavy footsteps came thumping down the stairs. Bradley was awake. Tiffany swallowed hard, regaining her composure. She stepped back, smoothing her robe, but she kept her eyes on the knife. "Fine," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "We will wait." "But when he sees this, Lawrence, when he sees you playing with knives, he is going to lock you away forever." I turned back to the stove and turned off the gas. Let him come, I thought. The table is set. The trap is primed. And breakfast is served. The heavy, uneven thud of footsteps hitting the bottom of the stairs announced the arrival of my son. Bradley stumbled into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. He looked like a man who had spent the night wrestling with demons and lost. His expensive silk pajamas were wrinkled. His hair was a bird's nest of grease and sweat, and his face was puffy and pale. The smell of stale scotch and fear radiated off him in waves, souring the aroma of the bacon and pancakes I had so carefully prepared. He stopped in the doorway, blinking against the morning light I had let into the room. His eyes swept over the scene. He saw the gleaming silver, the mountains of golden food, the steam rising from the coffee pot. And then he saw me. I was standing by the stove, wearing my apron, hands clasped behind my back, posture straight. I wasn't the bleeding, trembling old man he had thrown into the bedroom the night before. I was the butler. I was the servant. I was the conquered subject presenting tribute to his new king. A slow, ugly grin spread across his face. It wasn't a smile of gratitude. It was a smile of validation. It was the look of a bully who realizes his victim has finally stopped fighting back. He turned to Tiffany, who was still standing by the island, clutching her robe, her eyes darting nervously between me and the knife block. "See, Tiffany?" Bradley croaked, his voice thick with sleep and triumph. "I told you." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "I told you he just needed a firm hand. Look at him. He knows who the master of the house is now. A little discipline goes a long way, doesn't it, Dad?" He didn't wait for an answer. He didn't notice that Tiffany didn't smile back. He didn't notice the tension vibrating in the air, tight as a piano wire. He only saw what he wanted to see. Victory. Bradley walked past me, bumping my shoulder intentionally as he went. He headed straight for the head of the table. My seat. The chair I had sat in for 40 years. The chair where I had carved Thanksgiving turkeys, balanced checkbooks, and bounced my grandchildren on my knee. He pulled it out with a screech of wood against floor and collapsed into it. He spread his arms wide, claiming the space, claiming the house, claiming my life. "Coffee," he commanded, not even looking at me. "Black, and make it strong." "I have a headache." I walked over to the pot. I poured the dark, steaming liquid into his favorite mug, the one that said, "World's Best Dad," a gift I had given him when his own daughter was born. The irony was bitter, but my hand was steady. I placed the mug in front of him. "Here you go, son," I said. My voice was calm, neutral. "Drink up." Bradley took a loud slurping sip, sighing as the caffeine hit his system. Then his eyes fell to his plate. He saw the document lying there pristine and white against the fine china. The durable power of attorney. The paper that would strip me of my rights and hand him the keys to my kingdom. He picked it up, his greasy fingers leaving a smudge on the corner. He scanned the bottom of the page looking for my signature. It was blank. He frowned, his brow furrowing. He looked up at me, the anger flaring instantly in his eyes, hot and dangerous. "It is not signed," he spat. He slammed the paper back down on the table. "You said you would sign it at breakfast. Are you trying to play games with me, old man? Do I need to teach you another lesson?" He started to push his chair back, his fists clenching. I didn't flinch. I stepped forward, picking up the silver coffee pot again, refilling his cup before he could rise. "Eat first, Bradley," I said gently. "You need your strength. Look at you. You are pale. You are shaking. You can't make big business decisions on an empty stomach. Signatures can wait until after the bacon. I want you to be healthy." Bradley paused. The aggression wavered, replaced by confusion. He looked at the food again. The smell of the hickory smoked bacon and the sweet maple syrup seemed to hypnotize him. His stomach gave a loud, traitorous growl. "I want you to be strong for the trip," I added softly. Bradley looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Trip? What trip?" He smiled. It was a small, sad smile, the kind a father gives a child who doesn't understand the world yet. "The trip you are taking," I said. "It is a long journey, son. You are going to be away for a long time. You will need a good meal in your belly. The food where you are going isn't very good." Bradley stared at me for a second, his brain trying to parse the meaning. Then he laughed. A short, barking laugh of relief. "Oh," he said, shaking his head. "You heard about Italy. You heard Tiffany talking about the vacation." "Yeah, Dad. We are going on a trip. We are going to celebrate. We are going to spend some of that money you have been hoarding." He thought I meant a vacation. He thought I was giving him my blessing to take my money and run to the Amalfi Coast with his wife. He was so blinded by his own greed that he couldn't see the trap closing around his neck. "Yeah," I said. "Something like that." Bradley picked up his fork and knife. He stabbed a stack of pancakes, sawing into them, with a hunger that was almost animalistic. He shoved a huge bite into his mouth, syrup dripping down his chin. He chewed with his mouth open, making wet, smacking sounds. "This is good," he mumbled through the food. "See? This is how it should be. You cook, you clean, you sign the checks, and we take care of the rest. We will find you a nice room at Shady Pines, Dad. A room with a window, if you are good." He looked over at Tiffany, who had silently taken her seat at the other end of the table. She wasn't eating. She was staring at her plate, her face pale. "Eat, babe," Bradley said, gesturing with his fork. "The old man actually knows how to cook. Who knew? Maybe we can keep him around for a few weeks before we ship him off. Save money on a chef." Tiffany picked up her fork, her hand trembling. She took a small bite of egg, her eyes never leaving mine. She knew. She didn't know what was coming, but she knew the air in the room had changed. She knew the knife I had slammed into the cutting board wasn't just a kitchen tool. It was a warning. But Bradley was oblivious. He was eating like a king, washing down the pancakes with gulps of coffee. He was already spending the millions in his head. He was already picking out the color of his new Ferrari. "Finally, you understand," Bradley said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He leaned back in my chair, putting his feet up on the edge of the table right next to the fine crystal. "Finally, you realize that your time is over. I am the man of the house now. I am the one calling the shots." He picked up the pen I had placed next to the document. He clicked it open and held it out to me. "Okay, Dad," he said. "Breakfast is over. Sign the paper. No more stalling." Do it now, and maybe I will let you watch TV this afternoon. I looked at the pen. I looked at my son. I looked at the grease stain on his chin and the cruelty in his eyes. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could say a word, a sound cut through the house. Bing bong. The doorbell. It was loud, insistent. It echoed through the hallway, shattering the bubble of Bradley's arrogance. Bradley froze. His fork clattered onto the plate. He frowned, looking at the door as if it had personally insulted him. He checked his expensive watch. "Who the hell is that?" he snapped. "It is 7 in the morning. Who dares to come here at this hour?" He turned his glare on me. "Did you order something, old man? Did you invite one of your senile gardening friends over for tea?" "I told you, no visitors." He started to stand up, his face flushing with annoyance. "Get rid of them," he barked at Tiffany. "Tell them we are busy. Tell them the old man is sick. Just make them go away." Tiffany didn't move. She was staring at the front door, her breath hitching in her throat. I didn't move either. I stood at the end of the table, my hands resting on the back of my chair. I looked at Bradley, and for the first time that morning, I let the full weight of my gaze settle on him. "I didn't invite a gardening friend, Bradley," I said. My voice was calm, clear, and cold as ice. Bradley stopped. He looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time he saw something other than submission. He saw the steel. He saw the fire. He saw the father who had once carried him on his shoulders, but who was now preparing to drop him into the abyss. "Then who is it?" he demanded, his voice wavering slightly. I smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "They are guests," I said. "VIP guests. And they are here for you." Before Bradley could ask another question, before he could process the shift in the atmosphere, the front door didn't just open, it burst inward. The heavy oak door slammed against the wall with a thunderous crash. Voices shouted. Heavy boots stomped onto the hardwood floor. The sound of authority. The sound of consequences. Bradley dropped the pen. His mouth fell open. He looked from the door to me, and in that split second, as the reality of his world fractured, I saw the arrogance drain out of him like water from a cracked cup. The breakfast was over. The check had arrived, and it was time to pay. The heavy oak door slammed against the wall, vibrating the floorboards beneath our feet. Framed by the morning light pouring in from the porch, stood Sheriff Higgins. He was a mountain of a man, 6 feet 4 inches of county authority. His uniform pressed his badge, gleaming like a warning beacon. Behind him were 4 deputies, their hands resting near their holsters, their eyes scanning the room with professional detachment. But it was the man stepping out from behind the wall of blue uniforms who made my heart swell with a grim satisfaction. It was Jerome Katz. Jerry. He was wearing a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than my first truck, holding a leather briefcase that I knew contained the ammunition for the war we were about to wage. Bradley scrambled backward so fast, his chair tipped over with a deafening crash. His coffee mug, the one I had just filled, went flying. The hot black liquid splashed across the pristine white tablecloth and soaked into the front of his silk pajamas, leaving a dark, spreading stain that looked like a gunshot wound. He stood there, chest heaving, eyes darting from the sheriff to me, and then to Tiffany. Panic, raw and unfiltered, washed over his face. But then almost instantly, his survival instinct kicked in. He didn't see the federal agents. He didn't see the lawyer. He only saw the police, and in his narrow, arrogant mind, police meant domestic disturbance. He thought I had called them because of the slap. "You called the cops," Bradley shouted, his voice cracking with incredulity. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "You senile old man. You called the sheriff because I slapped you yesterday." He laughed, a hysterical, breathless sound. He turned to Sheriff Higgins, putting on his best charming businessman face, though it was ruined by the grease on his chin and the coffee on his shirt. "Sheriff, I am so sorry my father wasted your time. He is confused. He is not well. He fell yesterday. He tripped over the rug and hit his face. I tried to help him up, but he got agitated. He has dementia. We were just about to take him to a facility for his own safety. He spun toward Tiffany, his eyes pleading, demanding, "Tell them, Tiffany, tell them what happened, tell them he fell." Tiffany stood by the island, her hands gripping the marble countertop so hard her knuckles were white. She looked at the police, then she looked at me. She saw the knife still stuck in the cutting board. She saw the cold resolve in my eyes. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was calculating. She was a survivor just like me, and she was trying to figure out which way the wind was blowing before she set her sails. Bradley didn't wait for her answer. He turned back to the sheriff, his confidence growing as he spun his lie. "See, my wife is too upset to even speak. This man is dangerous to himself. Look at him. He is holding a knife." I looked down. I wasn't holding a knife. My hands were empty, resting on the back of my chair. Bradley was hallucinating threats to justify his narrative. Sheriff Higgins didn't blink. He didn't smile. He stepped into the room, his boots heavy on the hardwood. He walked right past Bradley as if my son were a piece of furniture and stopped in front of me. "Morning, Larry," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "Sorry about the door. Jerry said it was an emergency." "Morning, Jim," I replied. "Just in time for breakfast." Bradley looked between us, his mouth hanging open. He realized suddenly that this wasn't a standard call. The sheriff wasn't asking questions. He was greeting me like an old friend. "Wait a minute," Bradley stammered. "You know him, this is a conflict of interest. I want a lawyer. You can't just barge in here and intimidate me because you are friends with my dad." That was when Jerry stepped forward. He placed his briefcase on the dining table right next to the plate of cold pancakes. He snapped the latches open. The sound was sharp, precise like a judge's gavel. "You don't need a lawyer for a conflict of interest," Bradley Jerry said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. "You need a lawyer because you are an idiot." Bradley bristled. "Who are you?" "I am Jerome Katz," Jerry said, pulling a thick stack of documents from the case. "I am your father's attorney. I have been his attorney for 40 years. I wrote the deed to this house. I set up the trust fund you are so eager to get your hands on. And most importantly, I draft every single contract Lawrence Sullivan signs." Bradley sneered. "So what? You are here to threaten me with a lawsuit. Go ahead. Sue me. I have power of attorney, or I will in about 10 minutes. Jerry smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark that smells blood in the water. "We aren't here about the slap, Bradley. Although assaulting a senior citizen is a felony in this state, and we will get to that. But that is small potatoes. We are here because of the bank." Bradley froze. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like he had been embalmed. "What bank?" he whispered. "The First National Bank of Atlanta." Jerry said, picking up a piece of paper. "Specifically, the loan department. 3 days ago, a loan application was submitted for $850,000. It was a second mortgage on this property. The collateral was the Sullivan Logistics commercial fleet." Bradley swallowed hard. His eyes darted to the door looking for an exit. There were 2 deputies blocking the hallway and 2 more at the front door. He was trapped. The application was approved. Jerry continued pacing slowly around the table. The funds were supposed to be released today. It was a beautiful piece of paperwork, Bradley. Really, the financials were perfect. The credit history was spotless. There was just one problem. Jerry stopped in front of Bradley and held up the document. He pointed to the bottom of the page. "The signature," Jerry said. "It says Lawrence Sullivan. It looks like Lawrence Sullivan. You even got the little loop on the L right. But here's the thing, son. Lawrence didn't sign this." Bradley tried to bluster. "Of course he did. He signed it last week. He probably forgot. I told you he is senile." Jerry laughed. A dry, humorless bark. "No, he didn't. Because 3 days ago when this document was signed, Lawrence was with me. We were fishing. And more importantly, Bradley. I know this is a forgery because I designed Lawrence's signature for legal documents 30 years ago. We put a microscopic tell in every official signature, a tiny dot after the N. This document doesn't have it. I watched my son. I watched the realization crash into him like a freight train. He hadn't just lied to his father. He had lied to a federally insured financial institution. He had forged documents on a scale that wasn't a family dispute. It was a federal crime. "You didn't think I checked the mail?" I asked softly. "You didn't think I have alerts on my credit? You thought because I grow roses, I stopped reading my bank statements?" Bradley looked at me. His eyes were wide, terrified, pleading. "Dad," he croaked. "It was for the crypto. Vinny is going to kill me. I had to do it. I was going to pay it back. I swear. Once the market turned, I was going to pay it all back." "You stole from me," I said. "You tried to mortgage my life's work to pay a loan shark. And when I wouldn't sign over the rest, you hit me. You planned to lock me in a hospice to die." I looked at Sheriff Higgins. "I think we have heard enough, Jim." Sheriff Higgins stepped forward. He unhooked the handcuffs from his belt. The metallic ratchet sound seemed to suck the air out of the room. "Bradley Sullivan," the sheriff boomed his voice, filling the kitchen. "You are under arrest for federal credit fraud, aggravated identity theft, and elder abuse." Bradley backed away, bumping into the table. The silver rattled. "No," he whimpered. "No, you can't." "The money. I need the money." "Vinny is coming." "The money has been frozen," Jerry said coldly. "The bank flagged the transaction this morning. The account is locked. You are broke, Bradley. And Vinny, I suspect he will have a hard time collecting from a federal penitentiary." The deputies moved in. They grabbed Bradley by the arms. He struggled for a second, a pathetic, weak flailing, before they spun him around and slammed him against the refrigerator. The cold steel met his cheek, right where he had struck me. I watched them cuff him. I watched the metal bite into his wrists. I felt no joy. I felt no triumph. I felt only a deep, hollow ache in my chest, where my heart used to be. He looked at me over his shoulder as they hauled him toward the door. "Dad," he screamed. "Dad, please, tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you signed it. You can't let them take me." I picked up my coffee cup. I took a sip. It was still hot. "I didn't sign anything," I said quietly. Bradley turned his head, desperate, looking for anyone to save him. His eyes landed on Tiffany. She was still standing by the island, frozen, watching her world collapse. "Tiffany," Bradley yelled. "Help me! Tell them! Dad gave me permission!" He was begging her. He was looking at his wife, the woman he thought was his partner, the woman he had destroyed his relationship with his father for. He thought she was his savior. He had no idea she was the one who had handed me the final nail for his coffin. I put down my cup. "He wants you to speak, Tiffany," I said. I pulled the small digital recorder from my pocket and placed it on the table next to the silver platter of bacon. "Why don't we let everyone hear what you have to say?" The room was spinning, or at least it seemed that way from where I stood. My son was backed against the stainless steel refrigerator, the cold metal cuffs biting into his wrists, his eyes wide with a frantic, animalistic panic. He looked at the sheriff, he looked at Jerry, and he realized that his lies were dissolving like sugar in hot water. There was no way out. The evidence was overwhelming. The bank had flagged the transaction. The documents were forged. He was going to prison, and he knew it. In his desperation, he did what cowards always do. He looked for a shield. He looked for someone to share the blame, or better yet, someone to lie for him so convincingly that the truth might bend just enough to let him slip through. He turned his head toward the kitchen island where Tiffany stood, frozen, her knuckles white as she gripped the marble countertop. Tiffany Bradley screamed, his voice cracking and high-pitched. "Tell them! You have to tell them! You were there when Dad said I could use the equity. You heard him. You are my witness. Tell the sheriff that Dad gave me permission to sign for him and because his hands were shaking. Tell them it was a verbal agreement. He was begging her. He was pleading with his wife, the woman he had married, the woman he had adorned with diamonds, the woman he believed was carrying his child. He was looking at her as if she were his salvation. He thought they were a team. He thought they were partners in this crime against his father. But I watched Tiffany. I saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. It was cold and it was fast. She looked at Bradley sweating and handcuffed a man whose future had just evaporated. She looked at the federal agents. She looked at the lawyer with the briefcase full of evidence. And then she looked at the knife I had buried in the cutting board. She made a choice. It wasn't a choice born of loyalty. It was a choice born of survival. She took a step back, putting distance between herself and her husband. She raised her hands in a gesture of surrender, her face transforming into a mask of shock and innocence. It was a performance worthy of an award. "I do not know what he is talking about," Tiffany said, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. Bradley blinked, stunned. "What, Tiffany? What are you saying?" "I did not know anything about a forgery," she said, her voice gaining strength, pitching higher to sound like a distressed victim. "I thought the loan was legal. Bradley told me you agreed to help us, Lawrence. He told me everything was above board. I had no idea he was forging signatures. I am just as shocked as you are." She looked at Sheriff Higgins, her eyes wide and wet with fake tears. "Officer, please, you have to understand. I am a victim here too. I am pregnant. I have been so stressed trying to prepare for the baby. I trusted my husband to handle the finances. I had no idea he was a criminal. I am just a mother trying to protect her unborn child." The silence that followed was heavy. Bradley stared at her. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The betrayal hit him harder than the handcuffs. The woman he had destroyed his relationship with his father for, the woman he was trying to save from the loan sharks, was throwing him to the wolves without a second thought. "Tiffany," he whispered, his voice broken. "How can you say that? We planned this. We talked about it every night. You told me to do it." She shook her head violently, her hair flying. "You are a liar," she shouted back at him. "Do not try to drag me down with you, Bradley. This is your mess. You gambled the money. You owe the debts. I just wanted a stable home for our family. I watched them. The rats were eating each other. It was a spectacle of greed imploding upon itself. I felt a deep, dark satisfaction, but it was mixed with a profound sadness. This was my legacy. This was what my money had bought." I walked over to the sideboard in the dining room. Sitting there was a small, high-end Bluetooth speaker that Bradley had bought a few months ago so he could listen to podcasts while he drank my scotch. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I had already paired it earlier that morning while the bacon was frying. "Is that right, Tiffany?" I asked, my voice cutting through their shouting match. "You are just an innocent victim, just a pregnant mother trying to survive." Tiffany turned to me, her eyes narrowing slightly. She sensed a trap, but she was committed to her role. "Yes, Lawrence," she sniffed. "I am. I did not know he was stealing from you." I tapped the screen of my phone. "Well then," I said, "I think it is time we all listened to the truth." I pressed play. The connection tone beeped through the room loud and clear, and then Tiffany's voice filled the kitchen. It wasn't the trembling, victimized voice she was using now. It was the husky, seductive voice from the balcony at 2 a.m. "Relax, baby," the recording purred. "It is almost over. The old man is broken. I saw his eyes tonight. He is terrified. He is going to sign the papers at breakfast. I can feel it." Tiffany went rigid. Her face drained of all color, leaving her looking like a wax statue. Her eyes darted to the speaker, then to me, then to the recorder sitting on the table. Bradley stopped struggling against the deputies. He tilted his head, confusion warring with the horror on his face. "What is this?" Bradley whispered. The recording continued. "Bradley," she scoffed on the tape. "Oh, please. He is a mess. He is a nervous wreck. He thinks this money is going to save him from Vinny. He thinks we are going to pay me off his crypto debt and live happily ever after. He is so stupid, Marco." The name hung in the air like toxic smoke. Marco. Bradley looked at his wife. His eyes were wide, uncomprehending. "Marco, who is Marco?" The recording didn't stop to answer him. "He actually believes the pregnancy is the reason I am so stressed," the voice continued. "He thinks he is protecting his unborn child." And then came the laugh. That cruel, tinkling laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Of course it is not his. Bradley hasn't touched me in months. He is too busy staring at Bitcoin charts and drinking scotch to perform. The baby is yours, Marco. And soon we will be too." The world seemed to stop for my son. I watched the life go out of his eyes. The defiance, the anger, the arrogance, it all vanished. He slumped against the refrigerator, held up only by the grip of the deputies. He looked at Tiffany's stomach. The stomach he thought held his future. The stomach he was going to prison to protect. "It is not mine," he whispered. The words came out like a child asking why the sun went down. "You aren't pregnant with my child." The recording delivered the final blow. The second the funds transfer. "I am wiring $5 million to the offshore account. I am booking a flight to Milan. Bradley is dead weight. Let Vinny break his legs. I don't care." The recording ended with a click. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. It was the silence of a life being completely and utterly dismantled. Bradley stared at Tiffany. He looked at her as if he had never seen her before. He looked at her not as a wife, not as a partner, but as a monster. A parasite that had hollowed him out from the inside. "You," Bradley stammered. "You were going to leave me. You were going to steal the money and leave me here to die." Tiffany looked around the room. She saw the disgust on the sheriff's face. She saw the cold judgment in Jerry's eyes. She saw the utter lack of mercy in mine. She realized the act was over. The victim card had been played and rejected. There was no way out. So she dropped the mask. Her face changed. The fear vanished, replaced by a sneer of pure contempt. She straightened her spine. She looked at Bradley with eyes that were hard as flint. "You idiot," she spat. Her voice was venomous. "Of course I was going to leave you. Look at you. You are a loser, Bradley. You have always been a loser. You lost your own money. You lost your father's respect. And now, you have lost your freedom." She laughed again, and it was an ugly sound. "Did you really think I loved you?" she asked. "I loved the house. I loved the credit cards. I loved the idea of the inheritance. But you are pathetic. You couldn't even steal from a senile old man without getting caught." Bradley let out a sound that wasn't quite human. It was a guttural roar of pure, unadulterated rage. It was the sound of a man who realizes he has burned down his entire world for a lie. "You witch!" he screamed. He surged forward. The strength of his fury was so sudden, so explosive, that it caught the deputies off guard. He tore one arm free from their grip. He lunged across the kitchen, his eyes fixed on Tiffany's throat. He wasn't thinking about prison. He wasn't thinking about the police. He just wanted to destroy the thing that had destroyed him. His hand, the same hand that had slapped me yesterday, reached out, fingers hooked into claws, aiming to crush the life out of the woman who had played him for a fool. Tiffany screamed, stumbling back against the counter, knocking over a crystal vase that shattered on the floor. But the deputies were fast. They recovered instantly. 3 of them tackled Bradley from behind, slamming him onto the hardwood floor just inches from Tiffany's feet. His face hit the floor with a sickening thud. "Let me go," Bradley howled, thrashing against the weight of the officers. "Let me kill her. She ruined everything. She ruined my life." I stood there watching my son writhing on the floor, foaming at the mouth with hatred. I watched Tiffany pressed against the cabinets, breathing hard, her eyes wide with terror, but her face still twisted in disgust. This was my family. This was the result of 40 years of work. A son who was a criminal, a daughter-in-law who was a predator, and a house filled with broken glass and broken lives. Jerry walked over to where Tiffany was standing. He opened his briefcase again. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. "You might want to save your breath, Tiffany," Jerry said calmly over the sound of Bradley's screaming. "You aren't going to Italy. And you aren't going free." Tiffany looked at him confused. "I didn't sign anything," she said, her voice shaky but defiant. "You can't arrest me for having an affair. Being a bad wife isn't a crime." "No," Jerry said. "It isn't. But conspiracy to commit kidnapping is." He held up the paper. "I think we need to talk about the nursing home, Tiffany. Specifically the contract you signed yesterday. The kitchen was a war zone of shattered glass and shattered lives." My son was pinned to the floor, his cheek pressed against the hardwood, the weight of 3 deputies keeping him immobilized. He was panting, spitting, making sounds that were no longer words, but just raw, animalistic noises of defeat. The expensive suit I had paid for was ruined, twisted and stained, a perfect metaphor for the man wearing it. Tiffany saw the writing on the wall. She saw her husband neutralized, and her survival instinct, that cold and reptilian part of her brain, took over completely. She didn't look at Bradley. She didn't check to see if he was hurt. She looked at the French doors leading to the patio. The exit. She lunged. For a woman in high heels and a silk robe, she moved with surprising speed. She grabbed her purse from the counter and sprinted toward the glass doors, her eyes fixed on the freedom of the backyard. She probably thought she could make it to her car. She probably thought she could drive away before the net closed. But she forgot about Jerome Katz. Jerry didn't run. He didn't shout. He simply took 2 large steps to his right and placed his solid frame directly in her path. He moved with the effortless confidence of a man who had spent 40 years blocking hostile takeovers and legal threats. He was a wall in a 3-piece suit. "Going somewhere?" Tiffany, Jerry asked, his voice calm and terrifyingly polite. Tiffany skidded to a halt, her chest heaving. She looked left. She looked right. There was nowhere to go. She backed up, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. "Get out of my way," she hissed. "I am leaving. I am not under arrest. You heard the sheriff. I didn't sign the loan papers. That was all Bradley. You can't hold me here. This is kidnapping." Jerry chuckled. It was a dry, dusty sound. "Kidnapping," he repeated, savoring the word. "That is an interesting choice of words, Tiffany. Very interesting indeed. Because while you are technically correct that you are not under arrest for bank fraud, the morning is still young." He reached into his briefcase again. He moved slowly, deliberately, letting the tension build. He pulled out a second document. It wasn't a bank loan. It was a thick packet of papers with a blue cover sheet. "You see," Jerry said, stepping closer to her, forcing her to back up until she hit the kitchen island. "We aren't just looking at the money. We are looking at the timeline. We found this in your email outbox, Tiffany, sent yesterday at 4 in the afternoon." He held the document up. The logo at the top was a stylized pine tree. Shady Pines Extended Care Facility. Tiffany's eyes went wide. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. "This is an admission agreement," Jerry explained, turning the page so the sheriff could see it. "It is a contract to involuntarily commit one Lawrence Sullivan to a secure hospice unit in rural Alabama. It outlines the transport details. A private medical van was scheduled to pick him up today at 4. He turned another page. "And here is the interesting part," Jerry continued. "The reason for admission is listed as advanced dementia and violent psychosis. It says the patient is a danger to himself. It authorizes the use of heavy sedation for transport. Jerry looked at me, then back at Tiffany. Lawrence doesn't have dementia, Tiffany. He just beat you at your own game. But if that van had shown up and if he had been sedated as you requested, he would have disappeared. He would have been locked in a room 3 states away, unable to call for help, unable to access his money, waiting to die. Tiffany was shaking her head frantically. No, she whispered. No, that was Bradley. Bradley wanted him gone. I just helped with the paperwork. Jerry flipped to the last page. He pointed to the signature line at the bottom. Is that Bradley's signature, Tiffany? He asked. We all looked. The signature was flowing and elegant. It was unmistakable. No, Jerry said. That is your signature. You signed as the guarantor. You signed as the primary contact. You authorized the kidnapping and false imprisonment of a senior citizen across state lines. That is a felony, Tiffany. And in the state of Georgia, conspiracy to commit kidnapping carries a mandatory minimum sentence that will make you very old by the time you see the Amalfi Coast again. Tiffany dropped her purse. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. She looked at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and aged. She realized then that there was no Italy. There was no Marco. There was only a concrete cell and a prison jumpsuit. Sheriff Higgins nodded to one of the remaining deputies. Cuff her, the sheriff said. Tiffany screamed as the deputy grabbed her arm. It was a high, thin sound of pure terror. No, she shrieked. I am pregnant. You can't arrest a pregnant woman. I stepped forward then. I walked past the silver platter of bacon. I walked past the broken vase. I stood right in front of her as the deputy clicked the handcuffs onto her wrists. You are not pregnant, Tiffany, I said softly. I heard you on the balcony. Remember. You told Marco the baby was his, but we both know there is no baby. It was just another lie to keep Bradley on the leash. Just another lock on the cage you built for my son. She stared at me with pure hatred, her lips pulled back in a snarl, but she didn't deny it. She couldn't. The truth was out, and it was stripping her bare. I turned away from her. She wasn't worth my anger anymore. She was just a bad memory that was being carried out to the trash. I looked down at the floor. Bradley was lying there, his face pressed against the cold wood. He had stopped struggling. He wasn't screaming anymore. He was weeping. Great heaving sobs that shook his entire body. He had heard everything. He had heard about the nursing home. He had heard about the sedation. He had heard that his wife, the woman he tried to destroy me for, had signed the order to have me hauled away like garbage. He looked up at me. His face was a mess of tears and snot. His eyes were red and swollen. He didn't look like a businessman. He didn't look like a vessel. He looked like a little boy who had broken his favorite toy and couldn't fix it. Dad, he choked out. Dad, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she signed that. I just wanted the money. I didn't want you to die. I looked down at him. I looked at the son I had raised. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike. I remembered his high school graduation. I remembered the pride I felt when he joined the company, and then I remembered the slap. I remembered the look in his eyes when he told me I was old and useless. You didn't want me to die. I repeated, my voice flat. You just wanted me gone. You wanted me out of the way so you could pay for your mistakes with my life's work. I crouched down just a little so he could see my face clearly. You were going to send me to a hospice, Bradley. A hospice is a place where people go to end their journey. It is a waiting room for death. I pointed a finger at his chest. I built this empire with sweat and blood. I drove trucks until my back gave out. I fought for every contract, every dollar, so that you would never have to know what it felt like to be hungry. I gave you a life of comfort. I gave you a future. My voice rose trembling with a rage I had held back for 24 hours. And this is how you repay me, I said. You hit me. You forged my name. And you tried to throw me into a rat hole in Alabama to rot while you played big shot with money you didn't earn. Bradley flinched as if I had hit him. He squeezed his eyes shut, the tears leaking out. I am sorry, he wailed. I am so sorry. I was scared. Vinny, he said he would kill me. I was desperate. Dad, please. You have to help me. He tried to reach out to me, but the handcuffs held him back. He dragged himself an inch across the floor, scraping his expensive suit. Dad, please, he begged, his voice high and thin. I am your son. You can't let them take me. I will go to prison. I will die in there. Fix it. Please, Dad. Fix it like you always do. I stood up. I looked at Jerry. I looked at the sheriff. They were waiting for me. They knew I had the power to stop this. I could drop the charges. I could pay off the debt. I could make it all go away with a stroke of my pen. I had $45 million in assets. I could save him. Bradley saw the hesitation. He saw the father in me warring with the judge. Help me, Daddy, he whispered. It was the word that did it. Daddy. He hadn't called me that in 30 years. He used it now as a weapon. He used it to manipulate me just like Tiffany had manipulated him. I looked at the breakfast table. The food was cold. The coffee was spilled. The house was a wreck. I took a deep breath. I felt the ghost of Patrice standing beside me, her hand on my shoulder. She would have forgiven him. She would have saved him. But Patrice was gone. And the man standing in the kitchen wasn't just a father. He was a man who had finally learned that some debts cannot be paid with money. I looked down at my son one last time. I can fix it, Bradley, I said softly. Hope flared in his eyes. He stopped crying. But I won't. The silence that followed the chaos was heavier than the noise. The police cars had pulled away, their lights flashing against the morning sun. The neighbors who had gathered on the sidewalk with their phones out had eventually dispersed, taking their gossip with them. The front door was closed. The handcuffs were gone. And for the first time in 20 years, I was completely alone in the house I had built. I stood in the kitchen. It looked like a crime scene, which I suppose it was. The shattered crystal vase still lay in shards near the counter. The coffee stain on the floor where Bradley had spilled his mug was beginning to dry, a dark, sticky map of his failure. The breakfast was still there. The mountains of pancakes had collapsed into soggy mounds. The bacon was cold, the grease congealing on the silver platter. The steam was gone. The warmth was gone. I walked over to the head of the table and sat down. My chair. The chair Bradley had tried to claim. I picked up a piece of bacon. It was stiff and cold. I put it in my mouth and chewed. I expected it to taste like victory. I expected it to taste like justice. Instead, it tasted like ash. It was bitter, salty, and hard to swallow. I looked at the two empty chairs where my son and his wife had sat just an hour ago. I looked at the knife still buried in the cutting board. I realized then that I wasn't living in a home anymore. I was living in a museum of bad memories. Every corner of this house was tainted. The living room where he slapped me. The bedroom where they locked me in. The balcony where she plotted my death. I couldn't stay here. Not for one more night. I reached for the phone. Jerry answered on the first ring. He was already at his office, probably drafting the motions for the prosecution. It is done, Jerry said quietly. They are being processed. Bail has been denied for Tiffany because she is a flight risk. Bradley's bail is set at $2 million, which he doesn't have. Good, I said. My voice sounded hollow in the empty kitchen. Now, Jerry, I need you to execute the next phase. Are you sure, Larry? Jerry asked. You have lived in that house for 30 years. Sell it, I said. I didn't hesitate. Sell it all. The house, the cars, the furniture, even the silver. I don't want any of it. I want it listed by noon. I want an estate sale for the contents by the weekend. Liquidate everything. And the money, Jerry asked. Put it in the new trust, I said. The one we discussed. Not a penny goes to Bradley. Not a penny goes to his defense. Secure it so tight that even God himself would need a password to get in. Consider it done, Jerry said. Where will you go? I looked out the window at the rose garden I had tended for so long. I am going fishing, Jerry. I am going to find a cabin by the lake. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere with no cell reception and no guest rooms. 1 week later, I stood in the visiting room of the county detention center. It was a stark contrast to my kitchen. The walls were painted a depressing shade of green. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and stale sweat. I sat on a metal stool separated from the other side by a thick pane of reinforced glass. When the door on the other side opened, I almost didn't recognize him. Bradley walked in. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that was too big for him. He had lost 10 pounds in 7 days. His skin was sallow, his eyes sunken and rimmed with red. He hadn't shaved. He looked like an old man. He looked like me, but without the spine. He sat down slowly, wincing as if his body hurt. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He stared at his hands, which were folded on the metal ledge. Pick up the phone, Bradley, I said into the receiver. He flinched at the sound of my voice. Slowly he reached out and picked up the black handset. He held it to his ear, his hand trembling. Dad, he whispered. I didn't answer. I just looked at him. I looked for the arrogance. I looked for the son who had commanded me to make him coffee. It was all gone. All that was left was fear. Why, he asked. His voice broke. Why are you doing this? Why are you so cruel? You could have bailed me out. You could have hired me a lawyer. You have millions. Why are you letting me rot in here? I leaned forward. I pressed my hand against the glass right where his face was reflected. Cruel, I repeated. You think this is cruel? I touched my jaw. The bruise from his slap had faded to a dull yellow, but I could still feel the phantom sting of it. Cruel is locking your father in a room. Cruel is planning to sedate him and ship him off to die so you can pay a gambling debt. Cruel is letting your wife mock the man who fed you. I paused, letting the words sink in. You want to know why I am doing this, Bradley? Because the moment your hand connected with my face, something broke. It wasn't my jaw. It was the illusion. He looked up, then tears streaming down his face. The illusion that I could save you from yourself, I continued. The illusion that if I just gave you enough money, enough chances, you would eventually become a man. But that slap woke me up. It killed the indulgent father. It killed the man who forgave everything. I straightened my back. The man sitting in front of you isn't your daddy anymore, Bradley. I am Lawrence Sullivan. I am a businessman. I am a man who believes in contracts and consequences. You broke the contract of our family. You declared war on me, and now you are paying the reparations. But I am your son, he sobbed. Doesn't that mean anything? It means you owe me a life, I said. It means I gave you everything and you tried to take the rest. You owe society a prison sentence for the fraud, but you owe me for the betrayal. And that is a debt you can't pay with money. I stood up. The visit was over. I had seen upon what I needed to see. I had said what needed to be said. Wait, Bradley cried, pressing his face against the glass. Don't leave me, please. I am scared. I don't know what to do. I reached into the pocket of my coat. I pulled out 2 items I had brought with me. I slid them through the metal slot at the bottom of the window. The first was a small leather-bound book, a Bible. It had belonged to his grandfather. The second was a photograph. It was an old picture, slightly faded. It showed a young woman holding a baby boy. She was smiling, looking down at the child, with pure, unadulterated love. It was Patrice. It was his mother holding him on the day he was born. "Take these," I said. Bradley looked at the items. He picked up the photo with trembling fingers. "Read the book to find forgiveness," I said, "because you won't get it from me. And look at that picture every day. Remember the woman who loved you. Remembers that she isn't here to see what you became. Be grateful for that." I hung up the phone. I didn't wait for him to respond. I didn't look back. I turned and walked toward the heavy steel door. Behind me, I could hear him tapping on the glass, calling out a muffled sound that faded with every step I took toward the exit. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun. The air was fresh. The sky was blue. I walked to my car, got in, and started the engine. I didn't drive back to the mansion. I drove toward the highway, toward the lake, toward the rest of my life. The coffee in my mug isn't the expensive imported blend Bradley used to order. It is a simple roast from the general store down the road, but it tastes better. It tastes like peace. I sit on the porch of the cedar cabin watching the morning mist rise off the surface of Lake Lanier. The air here smells of pine needles and damp earth, not floor wax and stale ambition. This was the place Patrice and I had always talked about. We spent 40 years chasing the big house on the hill, the crystal chandeliers and the marble floors, thinking that was the finish line. We were wrong. This is the finish line. A small wooden dock, a fishing boat, and a silence so profound you can hear your own heartbeat. It has been exactly 1 year since the police dragged my son out of my kitchen. 1 year since the mansion was sold. 1 year since I dismantled the life everyone thought I should want and built the life I actually needed. I don't look back often, but I keep the books. A good businessman always knows where his assets and his liabilities are. My liabilities are currently serving time or serving tables. Bradley pled guilty. He didn't have a choice. The evidence Jerry and I compiled was a mountain of steel that no lawyer could climb. He was sentenced to 8 years in a federal correctional facility for bank fraud and aggravated identity theft. 8 years. He will be 46 when he gets out. He will have missed the prime of his life. He will have missed the chance to build something real because he was too busy trying to steal something fake. I don't visit him often, maybe once every few months. He has stopped asking for money. He has stopped blaming me. He spends his days working in the prison laundry, folding sheets, learning the value of labor for the first time in his life. He looks older. He looks tired. But for the first time in decades, he looks real. The arrogance has been scrubbed away by the harsh soap of consequences. And Tiffany. I took a sip of coffee, letting the warmth spread through my chest. My private investigator sends me a report every quarter. It is a short document, but it tells a long story. Tiffany didn't go to Italy. She didn't find Marco. When the money dried up, so did the romance. She is currently working double shifts at a diner off the interstate in Macon. She lives in a studio apartment above a laundromat. The report says she looks tired. It says she doesn't wear jewelry anymore. I don't feel happy about it. I don't feel gloating satisfaction. I just feel a sense of balance. The universe has a way of correcting itself if you give it enough room. She wanted a free ride. Now she knows exactly what a ticket costs. I put the mug down on the railing and walked down the wooden steps toward the dock. The sun was breaking over the tree line, painting the water in shades of gold and fire. I am not alone here. A young man was already sitting at the end of the dock, his legs dangling over the water, a fishing rod in his hands. He turned when he heard my boots on the wood. "Morning, Mr. Larry," he said, flashing a smile that was bright and genuine. "Morning, David," I replied. "Catch anything yet? Just a few nibbles," he said. "I think they are sleeping in today." David is 24 years old. He grew up in the foster system, bounced from home to home, never having a dime to his name. He made mistakes. He got into trouble. He has a record. Most people looked at him and saw a thug. I looked at him and saw a fighter. I saw someone who had the hunger I used to have back in 1978. I sat down beside him, groaning slightly as my old knees bent. I baited my hook and cast the line into the water. "How is the coding boot camp going?" I asked. "It is tough," David admitted, watching his bobber. "But I am getting it. I built a website yesterday from scratch. It actually works." I smiled. "Good. Keep at it. The scholarship covers the advanced courses too if you want them." David looked at me. His eyes were serious. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Larry. The Sullivan Startup Fund. It saved my life. I was heading down a bad road. No one ever gave me a chance before." "You earned it, son," I said. "I didn't give you anything. I just opened a door. You are the one walking through it." That is where the money went. The $45 million. I didn't hoard it. I didn't buy a yacht. I established the fund to help young men and women who had made mistakes, who had fallen down, but who wanted to get back up. People who knew the value of $1 because they had never had one. I looked at David. He wasn't my blood. He didn't have my last name. But as we sat there in the quiet morning light, waiting for the fish to bite, I felt a connection with him that I had never felt with Bradley. He respected me, not because of what I could buy him, but because of who I was. He listened to my stories. He asked for my advice. I realized then that I hadn't lost a son. I had just placed him in the only school that could teach him. Prison was Bradley's classroom. 8 years was his tuition. Maybe when he walks out of those gates, he will be a man I can respect. Maybe he won't. That is up to him. But I wasn't childless. I had found a dozen children like David. Children of the spirit, if not the flesh. I was building a legacy that wasn't made of bricks and bank accounts. It was made of second chances. My bobber dipped below the surface. A sharp tug on the line. "I got one," I said, reeling it in. David laughed, grabbing the net. "Look at that, Mr. Larry. You still got the touch." We pulled the base onto the dock. It was a beauty, shimmering silver and green in the sun. We admired it for a moment, then I carefully removed the hook and lowered it back into the water. It flicked its tail and disappeared into the depths. "Let it grow," I said. I wiped my hands on my jeans and looked out across the lake. The water was calm. The world was quiet. The chaos of the past year felt like a bad dream that had finally faded with the sunrise. People talk about revenge. They say it is a dish best served cold. But they are wrong. Revenge is hollow. It eats you up inside. It keeps you tied to the people who hurt you. What I did wasn't revenge. It was correction. It was gravity. It was the inevitable result of actions meeting consequences. I looked at the scar on the palm of my hand, a reminder of years of hard work. I touched the faint line on my jaw where my son had struck me. It didn't hurt anymore. The wound had healed. I took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. Justice is not about vengeance. Justice is simply the act of putting things back where they belong. The thief in prison, the predator in the cold, and the old man, the soldier who fought his final war, and one sitting on a dock in the sun. I picked up my fishing rod and cast the line out again, watching it arc through the blue sky. I am Lawrence Sullivan. And finally, for the first time in a long time, I am resting. This journey taught me that the greatest inheritance we leave our children isn't money, but character. I spent 40 years building a fortune to protect my son, only to realize I had crippled him. By shielding him from struggle, I robbed him of strength. True love isn't about giving everything. It's about teaching the value of earning it. Justice wasn't about punishing Bradley. It was about finally letting him face the consequences he had avoided his whole life. It is never too late to correct a mistake, even if that mistake is your own child. If Lawrence's story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of justice and redemption. In the comments below, tell me, would you have forgiven Bradley, or did Lawrence make the right call? I read every single comment. Until next time.